need support staff to clear the room. Stand up and walk now.
Hello and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I am an editor at TheRinger.com, and joining me on the other line, my wife, it's Andy Greenwald.
How long have you had that impression on ice? How psyched are you?
Never not funny, and now it's back. Greenwald, what's up? Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of this Disney news. We'll talk about the Miss Marvel casting news. We'll talk about the absolutely astonishing Barry Jenkins Lion King story. We'll get into some third day talk, and the second half of the show, I chatted with Bill Lawrence, the executive producer of Andy's fave, Ted Lasso. We'll get into the show in just a second. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Anytime Fitness. We may talk a whole lot about sports, but when it comes to keeping fit ourselves, there's definitely room for improvement. I hit this point early July. I was just like, I am not in good enough shape. I started trying to walk at least 15,000 steps a day, or hiking, or just anything to keep my legs moving. Now it's the end of 2023. I feel great. I had a physical 3 weeks ago, and the guy was like, you're doing great. You're doing better than you were 3 years ago. I felt great. Whatever your goals are, progress is possible thanks to Anytime Fitness. Get a personalized plan and support from an expert coach anytime, anywhere. Visit anytimefitness.com to try Anytime Fitness for free. Start to train for your life. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. See website for details.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day. And that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
Greenwald, what's up, man? Happy Thursday.
What a happy Thursday. You know, honestly, Chris, all days are happy in America in 2020.
Did you know you're supposed to say rabbit, rabbit on the first day of a month to give it good luck?
No. Which explains something.
Maybe that's the problem. I just found this out today from my wife. Phoebe was like, you were supposed to say this apparently. It's supposed to be the first thing you say when you wake up on the first day of a month. You go rabbit, rabbit. And I don't know if that comes from some sort of pagan ritual, and I'm sorry if I'm getting
it comes from a brotherhood of John Updike fans.
Yeah, right? Apparently, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Chris,
lonely English teachers in Western Pennsylvania.
That's our demo. Come on.
Yeah.
I also think that normally I might be skeptical of information like that I have not heard for the hundreds of months on which I've been on this planet. However, given the current state of things and the direction of all life on the planet, I am basically willing to become Jack Houston in Fargo season 4. Like, if you tell me I need to knock on every door I enter and exit 10 times, okay. Sure.
I'm already washing my hands 10 times a day. I'll do whatever work is necessary.
I mean, the amount, exactly. The amount of ritual I now have in my life, from not leaving the home without a face covering to giving all my liquid income to Senate races in states I've never visited. Sure. Pile it on. Whatever. Let me just say, big fan of Mississippi and Iowa. I got you.
Andy, so what do you want to start with today? I guess we have a bunch of Disney news to get to. I want to get to the third day, which concluded, I guess, the first half of its season.
The third day.
I want to talk a little bit about this absolutely bonkers Lion King stuff to me. And then the second half of the show, I talked with Bill Lawrence. The Ted Lasso finale is imminent, so the season finale. And if folks have been enjoying that, Bill and I had a really lovely chat about what he and Jason Sudeikis were sort of aiming for when they were making the show. And how it kind of evolved from. You were not their target audience, apparently. No, you didn't come up, honestly. We didn't bring up the haters. We just talked about. Now I know.
Chris, Brandon Flowers and I talked about you for like 10 minutes.
Did you really?
I just was testing if you listened to the interview.
Let's talk a little bit about Miss Marvel, because you texted me this news. Let me just give listeners a little bit of a background on this. So Miss Marvel is going to be a Disney Plus show. The star of the show is going to be someone named Iman Vellani, who will play Kamala Khan, a 16-year-old Pakistani-American girl in Jersey City who will become Marvel's first Muslim superhero. And it will eventually cross over into Captain Marvel's storylines, and they are projecting that it will make the jump from Disney Plus into the MCU, and the show will be run by Bisha K. Ali, who worked on Four Weddings and a Funeral, which I enjoyed very much, as well as it's going to be directed by Adil Arbi and Bilal Falah, who helmed Bad Boys for Life, which I assumedly have not seen yet. I can't
believe you haven't seen that.
Have you seen it?
No, I just assume you have.
No, I have not seen it yet. So this
historically, I am a fan of the Bad Boys expanded universe. By the way,
me too. If they want to, I'm just waiting for the Pantoliano standalone. That's what I'm holding up for. Let's talk a little bit about Ms. Marvel. You texted me and you were like, "This is huge.
This is big news." People might not know this character, but this character of Ms. Marvel is not just crucial to the success of Marvel, the comic book company, in the last 5 years. I absolutely believe that she is critical to the success of the MCU in general over the next 10. So they had to get this right. They took a chance on casting an unknown, which I think is probably the right move. I mean, how unknown is she? There seems to be one photo available to the press when they broke the story, and I think the photo was from a pamphlet handed out at TIFF, the Toronto Film Festival, where she was involved, not in a performing role. So she's under the radar, but I think that's good. So some background on the character. As Chris learned firsthand when he was working on the intro to this podcast a number of times, Marvel Comics publishes a lot of characters with the word Marvel in it.
Yes.
And basically, in the 70s, there was
I thought it was called Brad Marvel, but it was apparently I was wrong. Yeah.
That's pronounced Marvel. But in the 70s, there was a space lord named Captain Marvel, who was a Kree warrior whose name actually was Marvel. I stepped on my own joke with the truth. And Carol Danvers, who's the character that Brie Larson plays in the movies, appeared, and there was a connection to that character, but was basically given the name of Ms. Marvel, even though she was a captain in the military. Anyway, a few years ago, the character of Carol Danvers, who I've said this before on the podcast, it's worth noting again, spent all of the 1980s trapped inside the brain of the X-Men character Rogue, who stole her powers and her identity into her mind.
That was not in the movie, right?
No, but that's just what the 80s were like, kids.
Yeah. That's
so weird. Anyway, they realized that they had a great character here, and they gave her rightful name of Captain Marvel. And, that's it. There was a subsequent comic book series that was really great by Kelly Sue DeConnick. And
dude, you're just so on top of your comics.
So I love explaining this stuff. So at the same time, Marvel was, to their credit, looking for ways to expand their readership and also expand the representation in the characters in their ranks. As has been established for the last decade, the comic books, in a really interesting way, have sort of served as a farm system for the wildest, biggest, boldest ideas and new characters, the very best of which get upstreamed into the MCU. And that seemed to be a pretty successful working relationship. And an editor at Marvel named Sana Amanat, who basically wanted to create a character that was in some ways spoke to her background. She is a Pakistani American Muslim woman who grew up in the suburbs reading comic books and, not necessarily seeing herself represented in those comic books. She reached out to a comic book writer and novelist and memoirist named G. Willow Wilson, who herself converted to Islam. And together they came up with this character, 15-year-old girl, Pakistani American, as you said, Kamala Khan, who it's so crucial to me also. She lives in Jersey City. So she's that close. She's basically bridge and tunnel to the MCU.
Gotcha.
All the superheroes are swinging over the streets of Manhattan, and all the events are going down there, and she's just over the river. And she's a big superhero fan. And at the same time as this, Marvel, because they didn't own the movie rights to X-Men, tried to make their pre-existing idea of the Inhumans a thing. You may remember that disastrous TV show. Basically, They were like, we're going to...
That was on ABC, right?
Yes. They were like, we're going to bury the X-Men since none of this IP can go into our movies. Now it's no longer the case. And we're going to suddenly amp up this idea of that in the same way that mutants can just sort of appear, Inhumans can appear too, even though traditionally it was about a royal family that lived on the moon with a telepathic dog. Don't I make you just want to like crack the spine on some old graphic ends? Anyway, she got powers, and her powers, the word that was coined for the comic are embiggening. Like she can stretch her arm and make her fist really big. And she was given the name Ms. Marvel and got a really cool costume in tribute to her hero, Carol Danvers, and got a cool costume designed by Jamie McKelvey, who also designed the Captain Marvel costume that is in the movies. All of this to say This book in 2015, when it launched, I was G. Willow Wilson and Adrian Alfona, captured the thing that has always made Marvel Comics great. It didn't just set out to be a new Spider-Man. It was a new Spider-Man in the sense that the thing that has always made Marvel appealing was the kind of ground's eye view, the outsider's view, right? She was an incredibly compelling person with a life, and she's a teenager, so there are always the school problems and relationship problems, friend problems, but also had these powers and stumbled into the big time. And there's something about that alchemy that's just magic and really worked. And she became kind of a bridge from the older Marvel Universe characters that everybody knows to the new generation that they've been trying to populate. And some of those new generations, some has gone well, some hasn't gone well. Some of the stories have been better than others. There's been a lot of reactionary pushback because a lot of the next generation of characters are more diverse versions, for lack of a better word, of established characters. So there is a young black woman wearing a Tony Stark armor who's called Ironheart. There is a cybernetic daughter of Vision whose name is Viv Vision from that Tom King book I was telling you about. And they're in a group book called The Champions, blah, blah, blah. The thing that's so great about this is bringing her into the MCU not only puts us back on that ground level that I think works best for Marvel characters. Instead of, purple space gods, we could be back down in the bodegas of Jersey City wondering what the hell that wormhole opening up over Manhattan is. It's also a way to bring in new fans and a new generation of younger heroes into this world. And it's no accident that this huge video game that, again, this is just me talking because I haven't played this, but it looks cool. That came out this year. It was Marvel's Avengers, and it's like this big, massive, you can play all the heroes and play with friends, blah, blah, blah. The story that it tells is the Avengers are no more, and Kamala Khan has to bring them back together. She is like the skeleton key that brings them back together, which isn't to say that that's where the MCU is going, but it is a window into the corporate thinking.
Like they had all just kind of scattered to go start their own businesses or something?
Start their own podcasts.
Yeah.
Which was, which I normally would support. But so this idea that, which I like, it goes hand in hand with moving to TV for some of these stories. It's like, we've gotten real big with this. Everything in the Marvel universe for the last few years is either about the multiverse or, time travel or the fundamental facts of existence. And we've gotten pretty far away from one of the most appealing things about the Marvel universe, which was the more ground level humanity that's mixed into superheroics. So much like she is a bridge to that type of storytelling, she is a smart choice for the first person to be introduced in a Disney Plus TV series and then graduate into the films, which was something that was verboten from the TV arm for a while when they were feuding. And now they are no longer feuding because now movie characters are coming to TV. And now for the first time, it'll be vice versa.
Yeah. So I have very little to add in terms of, I can't add anything to what you've just said about the character. I'm obviously really unfamiliar with their comic book background, which is my point. Basically, is like we have now entered a zone where I think casual fans of the Marvel character galaxy are probably pretty unfamiliar with a lot of the people that are going to be coming forward in the next coming half decade. And I think that's really cool. Like, I think this started mostly with Guardians of the Galaxy, where I was just like, you got to explain this to me. Who are these guys? There's really a raccoon. Yeah, and I think we were appropriately skeptical at the time being, because I think we were sort of saying, like, you're not even done really telling the story of the Avengers and Iron Man and Thor and Hulk and all these things. We haven't even had a Hulk standalone movie. What is this Dirty Dozen in space?
This Edward Norton erasure will not stand. We have absolutely had a Hulk standalone movie in the MCU.
That's true. But, Ruffalo had not gotten his own one.
Yes.
I think that this just tells me, we're now in a realm that sort of has left behind the old way of doing things in the old school of Marvel characters. But also, I think it's going to be really exciting for a lot of people who aren't really huge comic fans to be introduced to these people, because those first round of Avengers movies were a lot of fan service. It was a lot of you've been waiting for so long to see Thor and his hammer, and we got the guy who looks like Thor, and this is the hammer. It was so much of it was about wish fulfillment, and this is actually just pure storytelling. And I'll say another thing, which is, I really admire how the way that they're running Marvel right now, it kind of reminds me of the San Antonio Spurs, where you have an institutional kind of culture and knowledge of the kinds of stories you want to tell. You have the veterans who maybe sell the thing on the way going in. So whether it would be like David Robinson or Tim Duncan, Kawhi Leonard briefly, but those veterans are ushering in the next generation. So I thought that was my favorite part about the first Spider-Man film, was it essentially being an Iron Man co-pro for some of it, and really kind of like, hey, if you want to you haven't had an Iron Man movie in a little bit, come along for the ride here. And the whole gambit of having Tony Stark appear in a bunch in Civil War and then in the Spider-Man movie was so smart. It was so smart, and it really does seem like, if we're lucky enough to be doing this podcast years from now, we'll probably look back at Marvel, or we'll look at Marvel and be like, this is the outlier. This is the exception to the rule. You can't really ever get this lucky and this good again.
You don't think when Kevin Feige hands off to Becky Hammond as head coach, like that the consistency won't be there? Are we sticking with the Spurs metaphor? I don't doubt it, actually. I think that they're building up something that's like, even if Feige were to leave, they've kind of set themselves up for another 5 to 10 years. I will say that, there's no reason to beat a dead horse with the Star Wars stuff. We've talked about it endlessly. But wouldn't this have been so much more the way you wish Star Wars had been handled? Like something so gracefully like this, something that had a little bit of 360 vision like this. And look, like, you can have as many characters as you want in the Skywalker saga movies, and then you can kind of start to build them out however way works, whether it's on a streaming show or with their standalone movie or in another saga. I don't know. It never ceases to impress me how they handle their stuff over there. Yeah, and I think that they've also put themselves in a position to be able to tell a story like this with a character that now, G. Willow Wilson wrote 60 issues of it. Saladin Ahmad, who's another great writer, has taken over. There's there. There's enough story. It's a great character, and they can do what TV can do best, which is do the character work over a slow build, have the story that's adjacent to the blockbuster story in a way that I think will attract fans and also work better on the small screen. The only red flag, and I hesitate to even use that word because it's not, it doesn't deserve a dramatic term like that. And also, I don't know, we haven't seen the show. We don't know what it's going to be. But talking about ground level character-based work, the opportunity for young women, particularly young women of color, to see themselves in a Marvel character, and also the fact that the character as written and as established is a really nice blend of action, but not R-rated action and comedy. The writing half of this show sounds dead on. The directing half doesn't give me pause, but it's a question mark. Now, I admire their commitment to making sure this is a Muslim story. Mm-hmm. There was a great profile on those director guys. I think it was in the Times, basically talking about their outsiderness. They went to film school in Belgium, and their interests were different than everyone else, and their background was different than everyone else, and that alone makes them interesting. But the idea of the Ms. Marvel story being put through the Bad Boys filter and aesthetic is curious. But, they're young and they're nimble, and they've made that one big movie that was clearly, holding the hand of Michael Bay. So it's not to say that they're just going to bring that aesthetic here. Sure.
Let's keep it on Disney.
Yeah.
By far, one of the wildest stories that I've seen this year, and at least within the sort of pop culture deal-making context, is the announcement that Barry Jenkins is going to be making a live-action prequel, I guess. Prequel sequel.
Action.
And quote-unquote live action.
It's a sequel, right? And I think it's a sequel. It's a straight sequel to Jon Favreau's reenactment.
So glad you asked. So the Barry Jenkins is going to be making a Lion King movie. And this is what is in the Deadline report. And I got this from the Department of Director bullshit, so bear with me here. This is a quote from Mike Fleming's Deadline report. They are keeping the logline under wraps, but I'm told that the story will further explore the mythology of the characters, including Mufasa's origin story. Moving the story forward while looking back conjures memories of The Godfather Part 2, set on the African plain with a continuation of the tradition of music that was a key part of the 1994 animated classic, the 2019 film, and the blockbuster Broadway stage transfer.
So why don't you... So I think we are essentially united in our feelings about this, but I have some acrobatic routines that I could do on the floor with ribbons to try and find my way into making this okay.
This is not a segment called Andy and Chris get to tell Barry Jenkins what he should be doing with his life. So I'll say that up top.
That's actually the subtext of the podcast. That's our subtitle.
I'm not mad at Barry Jenkins for doing this. Like I personally do not have a relationship with the Lion King. So this isn't like exciting for me at all. I love Barry Jenkins's work. I love Barry Jenkins's movies. There doesn't seem to be any shortage of announcements of Barry Jenkins' work in the future. I think he's completing post or almost wrapping up Underground Railroad, the adaptation of Colson Whitehead's novel that's going to be on Amazon. They wrap production, and he wrote and directed all the episodes, I believe. So that's incredible. And there's already been some stills released, the first look of that. So it's not like Barry Jenkins has been like, I guess I'll just Scrooge McDuck my way over here and just get the Chapek bag. Like he's also planning an Alvin Ailey life story, and he's planning possibly to do another season of The Nick with Andre Holland under the executive production of Steven Soderbergh. So Barry Jenkins is not turning his back on cinema here, and I have no doubt that a Barry Jenkins Lion King would be cool. I bring all of this up because we just had this conversation about Oscar Isaac, and I feel like I had this conversation with Sean and Amanda on The Big Picture about a couple of different directors and actors and them sort of disappearing into the franchise verse for the better part of a decade, and wondering, are you spending your prime years doing this kind of like mass entertainment stuff that's clearly going to be a kitchen full of cooks, and whether or not people are necessarily deprived of some other really great work that you could have been doing during those years, albeit at not that same price point and not that same check. That's kind of where my head is. I think when I first heard this news, I was like, God damn it, come on, man. But now I feel like I've softened a little bit.
Yeah, I think there are a couple things to add here. One, as Chris said, being the age that we are, we could not give less of a fuck about The Lion King as a franchise, as an idea. I saw the movie in the theater. I'm all about the circle of life. It's fine. I don't have this intense nostalgia that I think people who are just a generation younger than we do have for it, or honestly for any of those movies of that so-called classic Disney resurgence, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin. And less people think that I'm just hating on the past. Like, those movies are in rotation in my life now, and I still think they're pretty mediocre. So that's part of it. We just don't connect, but clearly so many people do. Lulu Wang, who the great director in her own right, who is Barry Jenkins' partner in life, posted a thing with their dog set to like the music from when they lift Simba. Like, this means stuff to people, so respect. And I hope that they enjoy what they get out of this. I think there are a couple other things to say, one of which is if The Mandalorian and the way the Marvel movies have been produced have taught us anything, it's that I think the time commitment, making anything is super hard, but the time commitment for these projects, particularly those that are almost entirely mocap, which I believe the Lion King movie was, that Favreau made, isn't necessarily going to take away. It's not like he's doing this instead of The Nick or whatever, right? Like, I think that he can tell people what he wants. They're going to do the ping pong balls, and then he can be there to craft the movie with the tools they give him. So I don't think it's necessarily taking him off the board for an extended period of time.
Yeah, right.
I think that's one part of it. The other part of it that I think we should, that I don't want to underrate is bigger than the movie itself. And it's something that we aren't necessarily the best people to be the spokesman for, but modeling that a Black filmmaker can produce content on this billion-dollar level. And it doesn't just have to be Jon Favreau, who is an incredible talent in what he's proven able to do. But I don't think anyone was looking at, Made or Jumanji and being like, this guy is the next great cinematic artist, which people have said, maybe rightfully so, about Barry Jenkins after Moonlight and Beale Street. Really underrated, by the way, Beale Street. And so take that with the fact that despite, it's Elton John's songs, isn't Jeremy Irons the voice of Scar? This has been claimed, I think, The Lion King, as a Black story because it is set in Africa. And when they made the Favreau version, it has Donald Glover and it has Beyonce, and it was an almost entirely Black cast. Once again with Favreau being like, put that ping pong ball a little to the left. So I do think it matters. I think in terms of representation and in terms of who gets to be in charge of these types of projects, it absolutely matters, and I respect the hell out of it. But the thing that I want to circle back to that we said when we were texting about it is I was suggesting, in some ways this is like, Ryan Coogler turning Black Panther into not just an exceptional movie, but something that really, really is a significant piece of art and piece of just work in the world in terms of its trickle-down effect and what it showed people. And not to step on your take, but I thought it was a really smart one. It was just purely that Ryan Coogler is a pop filmmaker. When we say that, right? And we say that like with a compliment.
Yeah.
But that is his métier, if you will, is getting audiences all the way in, right?
Yes.
Like the ATV scene in Creed, I mean, he is a populist, whatever you want to call it, filmmaker in the best way in the tradition of someone like Spielberg, where Jenkins, up to this point, has been more of an artiste.
Yes. I mean, it's been more Criterion than it has been Disney Plus. So I think when you're seeing the reaction out there, it has nothing to do with whether or not anyone thinks Barry Jenkins can make a good Lion King movie. It's just about whether or not you just do we need more Lion King movies, or are there other stories to tell? Are there other more beautiful? Yeah, I don't even know how to phrase this right, because I really do think like there's all the chance in the world that Barry Jenkins could make an incredible Lion King movie, maybe unlike any Disney film ever made before.
I mean, I think I like that you were suggesting that there's a time in the future when we're doing this podcast, because it suggests that there will be a time in the future, and I'm all in on that. But it might be worth looking back on this era and the art that it produced and what paths filmmakers took, because I think one of the things that people take into consideration when faced with these choices is someone's going to make this movie. The live action or whatever you want to call it, Lion King movie made $1 billion. They were going to make a sequel. So who's going to get to do it, and what are they going to do with it? And, I think there's 3 paths. I mean, there's probably more, but for the sake of being reductive on a podcast, I'll just pull that number out of the air and say there are kind of 3 paths, right? For engaging or not engaging. You can completely engage, and that's the Colin Trevorrow model, right? Where you make an indie film and then you immediately grab the bag and start making Jurassic Parks or Star Wars or whatever on that giant level, because that's what's being made. And you have ambition to do that. There is it's not really a one for them, one for me anymore model, but there is the kind of...
But that crucially is, I think, what's fucking me up in my thinking, is that I think I still have residual... I have a residual kind of reaction to news like this where I'm like, is this like kind of a sellout move? And I don't mean that against Barry Jenkins per se. I mean, like, I still have residual 90s-itis about deviating from doing it yourself and making something really special and important that only you could make. And that's my hangups. Like, those are outmoded, antiquated ideas of thinking about culture. I think that's why I reacted the way I did. It's just because you like Claire Denis does not mean you can't make a fucking Lion King movie, obviously.
Yeah, but I do think that there are people who choose the Claire Denis path and just continue to make their, smaller scale movies
and
that are true to them.
He will probably be able to make way more Claire Denis type movies after Lion King because he made Lion King.
I think the thing that this put into my mind, and it was also because we were talking about Fargo last week, and I was reading another interview. If you look at the last 5 years of Noah Hawley's career, or his career, actually his work to date, right, as someone who wrote a bunch of novels, created 2 TV shows that were not based on IP, that came and went 1 season each. One was My Generation and one was The Unusuals, that we always talk about because it had Renner under contract. For like a 7-year contract for an ABC cop show when The Hurt Locker came out, and ABC canceled it anyway. And then breaks through with Fargo, which is okay, I will make this puzzle box work because you have this IP and you want to make it something else. So I will use that as a trampoline to get to where I want to be in my career. And ultimately it worked, because you end up making a season 4, as we said the other day, that is purely a Hawley work, right? It's not really based on anything else. But then his other TV shows or other projects that we know about anyway, one is X-Men related, the one that I worked on, Legion.
Yep.
And then we know just from the trades and from things that he's talked about, there was a Doctor Doom movie that he wrote There was a Star Trek movie that he was going to write and direct that is now dormant. And then this week said that he pitched on an Alien show. None of this is a slight against him. And he has he also has a tremendous, enviable career. But that is the nature of having a career in TV now, or pretty much in anything, right? He has an overall deal with Fox, and Fox is like, you can pursue developing these other things. And, I worked with him on a Kurt Vonnegut adaptation, but it's probably telling that the X-Men related one went to air before the Vonnegut did, if the Vonnegut one ever does.
And that was a really fucking weird X-Men adaptation.
Yeah, it was super weird.
The fact that it still was able to go up under the cover of being part of the X-Men universe is why, I mean, who knows? The Vonnegut thing might have been even more straightforward than Legion.
No, I would say no. But yeah, like, you have to take those meetings and you have to throw those pitches, to keep the arm limber and to keep the arm paid. So it's just, it is something that we continue to watch. It's interesting. I think ultimately the bow to put on this particular box is like, we just think Barry Jenkins is awesome. So we will engage with what he gives us.
I love Barry Jenkins movies. I can't wait, and I'll see whatever he makes. That's what I would say. Let's talk a little bit about Third Day before we get to my interview with Bill Lawrence. So, Third Day concluded its first 3 episodes, which is they were entitled Summer. Those 3 episodes, and they were,
by the way, just like my summer in so many ways.
Exactly.
I have to say, it was uncanny, ripped from the headlines.
This land is the soul of the world, and it is sick. So we wrapped that up on Monday night. On Saturday, I don't know about you, Andy. On Saturday, we will get a 12-hour live theater event linking the 2 halves of the Third Day. This is a quote from HBO's press release.
Put this press release in the Smithsonian. It's one of my favorite press releases I've ever gotten.
It'll be broadcast on HBO's Facebook page. Again, a 12-hour theater event. I
Tell them what time it starts, Chris. Tell them what time it starts.
4:30 a.m. Eastern on Saturday.
1:30 on the West Coast.
While it will bridge the 2 halves of the season, HBO says it is basically, it's not requisite for enjoying the limited series. So
also note, Jude Law will be wandering in the background at certain points, though we don't know which points. Catherine Waterston will be as well. Maybe some of the other friendly faces from the show. Also, Florence Welch of And the Machines will be there in some capacity, perhaps performing at the annual OC Folk Fest. It's just tremendous. God bless.
So I guess you can watch you can watch replays of this play, and maybe, I don't know, maybe they have plans to cut it down from 12 hours. I, as a avowed fan of this show, don't know how I'm going to make my way through a 12-hour immersive theater experience, despite the fact that I really would love to check out large swaths of it. I got the impression from Catherine Waterston that this was like one of the reasons she did the show was to try something like this. Now, I'm pretty sure in its original conception, this was supposed to be, I think, shot on the island. Like, they were going to do this as a kind of like, on-set experience.
Yeah.
I imagine they're doing it in some sort of COVID testing-friendly theater experience. We'll have to see. First of all, are you going to check this out at all?
I mean, look, it ticks all my boxes. 12-hour events, 1:30 a.m., Facebook, like, these are just all my interests back to back to back.
You're usually already on Facebook Saturdays at 1:30 a.m. Yeah.
Those are prime doom scrolling hours. So yeah, I mean, I'm interested, but like you said, I don't know what to do with it.
Right.
I kind of feel like that's actually a decent statement on how I'm feeling about the show in general. A moment ago, we brought back this idea.
You've tempered a little bit. You've regressed to the mean.
A little bit. Well, because the thing I was saying before about like one for me, one for them.
Is that how you feel about this podcast?
Well, not when I get to interview Brandon Flowers. Put this in the mouth of an HBO programming executive. That's what I feel about this. And because when the show started and that premiere episode was so great and so thrilling and such a tonic for people who are bored with things being kind of samey, I was like, why aren't they promoting this more? Why are they're not burying anything. It's HBO. It's there for you. But like, I didn't see much promotion for it. And then the next 2 episodes aired and I was like, oh, I get it. This is one for them. This is what HBO is saying of people they want to be in business with. And it's something they admire. I think that this show, kind of like what you said Catherine Waterston told you, I'm so thrilled they're doing it. I'm so thrilled they're going for it. I admire the hell out of it.
Mhm.
I think that the tightrope act that it's been performing between compelling, deeply unsettling strangeness and come the fuck on total bullshit tipped
Yeah.
pretty hard in the third episode. But it doesn't, I really want to be clear that even if I was rolling my eyes, I was not averting them. Like,
Sure.
I am really committed to the experience and in awe of their commitment to creating this experience, Jude Law especially.
The show itself has, whether you want to call it dream logic or mushrooms logic or whatever, it has that kind of logic. Does that logic explain how Jude Law's character will get onto the other side of an island or seemingly be in a completely different setting at any given edit? Not necessarily. You know, I can't tell you where the line between it's dream logic and this is that something happened here in the edit, or like they couldn't quite, you know, bridge this scene with the next scene, or does it make sense that this is happening, and where did Catherine Waterston's character go for this whole time? And obviously some of the reveals towards the end of the episode in 3, where essentially everyone is in on this performance to convince Sam that he is in fact the rightful father of OC is you know, explains some of it. And I suppose also, given the amount that he imbibes over the last over the 3 days, that we're supposed to think that, you know, who knows how fucked up he is wandering around that island. It definitely went to more of a kind of, you know, pagan horror zone in the third episode with the Epona reveal, with all of the stuff with just at the end with like the kind of the ritual that they were doing with the suicide of the father. So, you know, I enjoyed it. I can understand why it's not everyone's cup of mushroom tea. I have a working theory that this is basically some kind of King Arthur story. Because, you know, like there was a real huge theme in Arthurian legend is that like Arthur and the land are one. That the sort of health of the English country, or whatever it was back then, was dependent on Arthur, and Arthur dependent on it. And all the stuff that they keep saying about the land is sick and this place is sick and Sam is the true father and needs to save it, and that Sam himself is sick and that being here will somehow heal him, and obviously his son's there. And that, you know, the second half of the show, which I have not watched ahead at all, will be some sort of quest to figure this out, you know, by whether it's by his wife or whoever.
I hope so. I think that I rarely do this, but I did watch On the Next Third Day.
Yeah, right.
And it introduces Naomi Harris, who I love as an actor, showing up for what essentially feels like a reset. I don't want to be told more, because one of the pleasures of the show is really not knowing what's going on, but it was hard to watch that next on and not feel like, so we're just doing it again. I'm sure we're not, but there was an element of that. And I think that ultimately, with programs like this, there is always a dance between style and substance, between director and writer, between spectacle and emotion. And I think that for me, this episode was a little bit uneven in that regard, because fundamentally, the idea of a show about a guy in a dark place in his life, presented with a choice, which is go back to your normal life where you are in perpetual mourning and there's a piece missing from you, or live in hell or some version of hell away from it with the piece that you've been yearning for. That's really compelling, you know, and that drives a legitimate push-pull, right? But the thing that I felt was lacking, just purely from a story perspective in the third episode, was we've never seen his wife. We don't understand what he is theoretically going back to or running away from. And that lack of a counterweight kind of kept me from buying all the way in, even though the very last action that Sam does in this third episode, where he just basically willingly walks towards his son, is moving. I mean, Jude Law is selling the hell out of every single step on this journey, but there's so many detours for stylistic flourishes that I admire, like whether it's the, eating a beating heart or the crickets, the locusts everywhere, that it's almost a distraction from that very elemental and emotional yearning that I think otherwise could ground such a high-flying show. Ground in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I remain really impressed by what Jude Law has done over these 3 episodes, and we've heaped praise on him. I feel like the more that they took him away from talking to other people, the more my eye drifted a little bit. I think that when he was forced to interact with the strangeness of this place by talking to Patty Considine and Emily Watson's characters, or dealing with getting to know Catherine Watterson's character, it felt equally eerie, but just way more compelling. Whereas when it's just him wandering through forests, having visions, getting chasing, I think after a while, it sort of went from Hitchcockian into Lynchian into kind of a muddle, but it still has my affection and my attention.
Me too. I think the hardest thing about making TV in this era is getting the ratios right.
Yeah.
It is kind of like baking, that there's just things that you can do in a 90 to 120 minute movie, and people kind of know those rhythms. Like people, whether you're making a Bad Boys sequel or you're making, The Other Side of Hope, this incredible Finnish movie that I want to talk to you about once you've watched it on Criterion Collection, like people understand the shape of it and what's possible there. And that length of time is pretty good for doing style and substance, right? Like you can kind of get the big emotional beat, and you can also do it in a stylish way, and then you all walk away friends. When you spread it out over a number of hours, everything gets tricky. And I say this because I found it really hard to do, and I think everyone finds it hard to do. Yeah. And so that essential idea that works in movies that I will never see, but I might browse the Wikipedia page of like someone is trapped in a terrifyingly creepy place. You could do that in 1 hour. You can do that in 2 hours. You start to tip past that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You start to feel the seams, and like maybe you put too much egg white in the batter or whatever. So it's an experience, and it's a vibe, and I love that it's out there, and I love that they're doing it. I haven't loved watching it as much as I initially did.
Well, let's see what Naomi Harris brings to the table. Maybe it changes the entire chemistry of the show. I mean, it's a different director.
I bet she's going to bring some intensity. I think she is.
Andy, it was lovely talking to you. We'll wrap it up there
Always.
And get into my conversation with Bill Lawrence. We talk a lot about Ted Lasso, but no spoilers for the season finale. We'll maybe chat about that next week. Greenwald, always a pleasure.
On Monday, tune in for another episode of Andy Explains Comic Books. I think it's one of our best, if not wordiest bits. Enjoy this interview. Enjoy your weekend, Bransky's.
This episode is brought to you by Mint Mobile. New Year's resolutions are fun the first couple of weeks. Then you kind of maybe conveniently forget about them halfway through January. No shame. It happens to us all. But this year I have a foolproof plan, at least when it comes to saving money. Just switch to Mint Mobile and you're done. Goal accomplished, because for a limited time, their wireless plans are $15 a month when you buy a 3-month plan. The great thing about Mint Mobile is there's no jaw-dropping monthly bills or unexpected overages, and all plans come with unlimited talk and text. Get this new customer offer today at mintmobile.com/watch. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. I'm joined now by Bill Lawrence, executive producer of Ted Lasso. Among, many legendary sitcoms, has worked on Spin City, Scrubs, Cougar Town. And Bill, thank you so much for joining us today, man.
I'm happy to, man. Excuse to not be working. It's awesome.
I went back and I watched, I went back to the origin story, the original text of Ted Lasso, and watched some of the commercials because I don't think I'd seen them since they were on NBC for the Premier League. And I was struck by the adjustments you've made to the Ted Lasso character, because he's a little bit more of a prick in the commercials, right? Like he has like a little bit of an edge to him, and he's a little bit more arrogant about not knowing about English culture.
He was definitely bombastic and kind of, look, man, those commercials, I'm a comedy writer. We all thought they were hysterical. But Jason, Brendan, and Joe, the 3 of the creators of the show that kind of did those commercials for the Premier League, they were doing sketch comedy, for that, and Jason, when we first started talking about this, was well aware that guy couldn't, it's the same way if you love Naked Gun or Airplane, probably couldn't do 3 seasons of that stuff because it's the same type of joke over and over. Jason knew right at its inception that for this to be a TV show, we needed to give Ted some more depth and kind of tweak him as a character.
And I was wondering, starting from the starting point of it being, this an advertisement essentially, I guess the only way to go is deeper, right? Because it's like you have to keep expanding this character. You have to keep kind of giving him some emotional depth, giving him a backstory, giving him some things for people to latch onto. Was that actually a fun challenge to have rather than whatever, like starting from somebody who you're knitting out of whole cloth?
Yeah, look, it was such a challenge even to sell the show, because in a good way, Jason came to me and he's like, man, I get more recognized for Ted Lasso in the UK and Europe than for any movie or SNL or anything. I'd love to do this as a TV show. And he had a bunch of stuff already thought out. And the burden was, when you have funny sketches like that, and you go try to sell it as a TV show, they're available for all those streaming sites to watch. And the hardest part for Jason and me was convincing people that it was going to be different than those. I don't even think of them as commercials, to me.
Sure.
They're like promotional videos that those guys, real comedians, it wasn't a marketing ploy, invented a character. And I think those things stand up as funny regardless. So it was really hard to go out and say, I know you guys have seen those, but it's different than that. He's a better guy. He's nicer. It's more optimistic and hopeful. He's not as much yelling, because they had stuff to look at. And only Apple, was kind of like, oh, we get it. We see what you're trying to do. So that challenge was a blast. And with those expectations, of what that character was, the most fun thing for me, I'm very grateful for all the positive response, but so much of it starts with the disclaimer of, this show, I couldn't be more surprised or shocked. This show is actually decent. And I always take the time to say I'm as surprised as you are. You know what I mean? But it's that narrative has been really fun for me.
That actually leads to a question I wanted to ask you, which was there a scene that you guys wrote? Was there a moment on set? Was there something? What was the first time you thought that? Were you like, oh, maybe we have something special here?
No, what was interesting, man, is I thought that, that especially knowing that Jason would be playing the part and getting to hear him read lines while you were writing them, even before you have a cast together, I thought that the show was going to work creatively in the sense that we were all going to be proud of it and like it. I thought it was really good. The cast is all really good. And I thought that early on. I was worried about expectations in terms of it's a sweet, hopeful, optimistic, show. And I'm a comedy writer. I love snarky, edgy comedy. And I love Veep is one of my favorite shows ever. And I've written a ton of it myself, but we don't live in that world. And I thought there's a chance that combined with what people's expectations were of what this show would be from the previous things could be a real issue. And so far it hasn't been. People have been happily surprised.
How do you balance that by basically having Jason be this like Capra-esque guy while Veep is happening around him to some extent?
I think, it was really interesting. Yes. But I wouldn't say it's like Veep's happening around him as much as, I remember talking in the writer's room and, the pandemic hadn't started when we were working on this and writing this, but it certainly is a cynical and edgy time in which were somebody like Ted Lasso to present themselves to you. Right now, I would say most of us, the initial assumption would be this is all an act. And within a week or so, that person's going to reveal who they really are. And they're going to be a horrible jerk, just like everybody else. And we started talking as a writing staff that when those people actually turn out to be those rare people in your life, teachers, mentors, whatever, sincere and kind, the first thing you do is look at yourself and go, oh man, who have I become that anybody that's nice, I automatically assume he or she is up to something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that kind of notion is what is kind of the framework and base of the whole show, And so, there's skeptical people around him, but watching them kind of learn is part of the journey, I
thought that I wanted to ask you a little bit about the football/soccer part of it, but as a sports show, I think when people engage with a sports show or a sports film, they have a willingness to believe that anything is possible, because so many of the most successful sports stories are these underdog stories and are about, David beating Goliath, that those are the ones that we are immediately drawn towards. And I guess that almost gives you a little bit of a platform to work from, because the audience is like gonna go with you on the journey because they've seen they've seen Miracle and they've seen Rocky and they've seen things where they're like, yeah, Rudy is this is a world where Rudy can happen. So why couldn't Ted Lasso happen?
It's so astute, Chris, because see what I did there, I complimented you.
Yeah.
Smooth way in. Because look, what we talked about is when we think we're doing a sports movie. We all love it, okay? And the reason we like that for a TV show is sports movies transcend sport. I'm not a huge boxing fan. I saw every Rocky movie the night they opened, okay? And what was really interesting is when you're doing a sports movie, you have a decision right at the start, which is we're going to do a sports movie, but it's different. And then you're like, really? So you're not going to do the underdog? You're not going to, that's really hard. You know what I mean? Because there's been so many. Everybody's got a different favorite. Bull Durham, Cutting Edge, if you like figure skating, Hoosiers, Rudy, Major League, name them. And so what we decided to embrace instead is if you're doing a sports movie as a 3-season, TV show, you get to do the tropes that people expect, let them think they know what's going to happen, and then twist the tropes in a way that seems kind of cool and surprising that you get to know the characters better, So I'm well aware, as is Jason, that in the movie Major League, there's so many things that we've taken from the movies we've loved, had an owner that was trying to destroy the team. And that's what that character did. They said, I'm trying to destroy the team, and they try to destroy the team. And for us, we go, wow, if Major League was a 30-episode season, maybe you'd find out why that person felt that way.
Yeah.
And maybe you'd humanize them, and maybe you'd try to make people sympathize for them of how they got there. And maybe, by the course of events, they would find their way out of that hole, or maybe not, and that's how we kind of approached it. Embrace all the tropes and then do our own spin on them.
Yes.
As we kind of examine. So we have the diva player, we have the aging star, we have, the girlfriend and stuff. But I would argue that not any of them is completely 100% typical once people let themselves get sucked in.
Yeah. What was your relationship to European football going into this show? Big fan or couldn't?
Dude, we joked in the writer's room that other than Brendan Hunt, one of the creators who loves the Premier League, that I knew the most about soccer/football because I won a state championship when I was 11 in Connecticut. I was the goalie, and I was never quite sure of all the rules. Like, I knew I was always supposed to yell. I mean, we won the states. I got the trophy, and I knew I was supposed to yell offsides if someone scored on me, but I was never quite sure if it was offsides or not. And we're sports nerds. We were required, for our own sanity, not only Brendan, but we hired some British writers, both for cultural help, but intentionally one whose whole family are Tottenham supporters, one whose whole family are Crystal Palace supporters, just so they gave us, the cultural background and that kind of psychotic, British fandom and what it means.
Yeah.
And then we equated it to American college football because that's the only place here that you see such, tribalism and regional obsession that kind of the whole culture and life is based around it.
Did you, when you were like talking to the British writers, or as you were getting a little bit more familiar with the Premier League, did you come across people like Roy Keane, who feels like a real life version of Roy Kent, or did you come across like a Jamie Vardy or people like that you were like, you got to be kidding me? This is an amazing character. We should use some of this in the show.
We watch the Sunderland documentaries. We've all buried ourselves, and we know about everything from which you speak, and are trying, our best to be authentic and to have people see things that are real within it, So of course we all buried ourselves. I know more about the Premier League than I ever wanted to right now, which is fine. Like right now we're all following, what's the chain? All the writers were on a text chain today. I think it's about this writer that's not going to an Italian team because he lied on his test.
Oh yeah. Luis Suarez, because you have to take an Italian language test to be on an Italian team. And I guess he failed
passed,
it or didn't take it.
He cheated.
Yes.
Classic, man. Classic. But so we are begrudgingly learning, and but you can't look. I would also use this opportunity to make a plea: is we're going to do our best. I think we got better and better at shooting the football, and we're trying to stay real. I tried to prep everybody for with the Premier League, the fans are so obsessive. Even now I'll see they're trying to pretend that it's Everton, and I saw I'm like, no, the locker room's not the right color. I get it. Okay? And and I went through this on Scrubs because there would always be a lot of really supportive fans that we were grateful for, and some people that didn't like it. But then the other pocket was all the people that catheter was set to the medical community.
The one surgeon who's on message boards.
They would never do this without steroid. The X-rays backwards. I'm like, yeah, I know the X-rays backwards. It's supposed to be. They're scrubs. And so it's a hard battle, but I understand it because I'm the same way with my sports,
How do you push? What did you guys have any internal rules for how, not naive, but like basically how much of a newbie could Ted be in this role while still keeping Richmond even vaguely afloat? Like, because he's learning the game as the season's going on. I know he has help. I know he's got Roy and his assistant coaches, but you don't show a lot of football. In your mind, did you have like a line that you couldn't cross in terms of Ted's relationship to the sport itself?
All right. So look, there's a metaphor for, we live in an era, no matter where you fall on it politically, that a reality star is the guy that guested on my sitcom Spin City is the president of the United States. So
that's
to
true.
me, yeah, a successful coach could get hired as you know what I mean? It's like, to me as a TV writer, I'm like, oh, so there's no rules anymore. Oh, okay. So the one thing that we wanted to make clear is it's okay for Ted to be slightly ignorant or clueless in this world. And it's one of our biggest rules. It's from Jason. Ignorance with arrogance is no bueno. And that's what the commercials kind of did, which was, I don't know, but I'm going to just get louder and yell,
Yeah.
But being clueless or ignorant and learning and never going back to that, ignorance with curiosity is like the best version of, an American abroad to us is like, oh, that's how it works. Now I got it.
Cool. I got it. Yeah.
And we also decided that we had to make it clear to people that Ted is dumb like a fox. And that, so look, it's goofy to talk about in terms of a pilot, but getting Scott Van Pelt and SportsCenter to make it at least some authenticity that, oh, this guy coached a football team to a national championship, to me, let us go, all right, so he's got something as a coach akin to these motivators and gentlemen that these kids will suddenly kill or die for that's special. And it kind of validated them for us. So those were our rules, that he's actually a good coach and that he learns as he goes. And that bought us the ability to occasionally be just flat out clueless.
I was reading some other interviews you had done around Ted, and you were talking a bit on, especially about working on Spin City and sort of finding characters as you guys were going through this, what was back then a normal season, but now it seemed absurdly long to do 23, 24 episodes, however many episodes of a season of Spin City there were. And, you would just sort of find characters as the show was airing, as you were still continuing to write the season. Is that process very different now? Like, do you have to sort of decide this is who Rebecca is and this is going to be her arc for better or for worse? And what's that like?
Yes, in terms of creating the characters and the types and knowing where we want their emotional journey to go. No, in terms of when we got different performers there, it was so exciting to cast people in the UK that I hadn't regularly worked with before. And that, talent that was new to us, not necessarily new to them. But we, without a doubt, once we cast people, tweaked everything to their strengths. And, that gradual handing over of ownership of a character from writers to performer, it worked really well on this show. And, part of the experience was creating that in our own way, so much so that Christopher Fernandez was this kid that read for Jamie Tart, and sent his audition in. And he didn't get that part, but he was so joyful and an amazing footballer and stuff. I'm like, oh, this guy's going to be someone named Danny Rojas that comes in the middle of and we just got it from seeing him work and getting a feel for him as an actor. And he was so joyful and kind, and it just bled out. That's who that guy actually is, former professional player too.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he played in Guadalajara for years and then went to an acting academy in London. So we were still able to do it. We just had to do it in a different pace than we do it here in the States.
Was the process, it was the production process working on a streamer much different, or was the notes process different? Were there any surprises or any changes for you?
The Apple is really supportive, but I've been doing this for a long time, so I think I'm bought certain leeway of people trusting me until I screw up. And the biggest thing was not being a prisoner to running time. Do you know what I mean? And you can see our episodes range from like 27 minutes long to like 35 minutes long. It's just however it kind of worked. The toughest thing in shooting in London is American filming. This is just random from producing side, thrives on overtime. Okay. That you try to fit it all in your time period. And then when you can't finish an episode, you say to the crew of like, hey, we go, till midnight tonight, tomorrow night, we'll finish this episode. Everybody will make a lot more dough, and it'll be a hassle, but great. And that's how these shows all work. Was so funny for us as neophytes getting over there. The craftsmen and the crew are so good. The actors are so good, but they're not down with overtime, man.
They just go home. Yeah.
You're like, hey, if you want, we can spend 2 more hours and finish this. They're like, no, we're good, but thank you. Good night.
They're like, we're going to the pub. See ya.
Oh my God. So just learning how production works there was a battle, A, and B, there's no reason to go over to the UK and shoot this unless you're intending to use the city itself, and finding ways to do that, production wise in a short time frame was tough, but I think we managed to do it with that park and that neighborhood and stuff of Richmond. So
yeah, I really enjoyed the small but like very lived in sense of London, and like even just the returning to the pub over and over again. I thought it was just like a really nice setting for it.
It's hard not to. Yeah. By the way, my favorite thing is that our practice field is from the lowest division of professional soccer there, where people, I think, probably the lowest division that the players don't necessarily have other jobs.
Like they don't. Right. So would it be like League Two or?
I think it's even below. It's Hayes and Yetting, if you look it up. And they actually had a great season. They had a great season that ruined our production thing because they were a perennial awful team, and they were suddenly in these big games that on days we were supposed to shoot on that field. But a cool thing of trivia, their stands are modest, and they had this giant, just empty, almost crawl space attic of, I guess at one point it was going to be luxury suites or something like that above the small stands that was never completed. And so when we went over there, I was like, how do you guys feel about us building a set of the owner's office up here? And they're like, yeah, we don't care. And so that window of hers that you look out at, field, that's actually their field. Do you know what I mean? And they play their actual games in, and stuff. And we built sets above their stands in it. It's the weirdest thing that I've ever done as a producer. But I think that type of stuff added to the authenticity too, I hope.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't look like it was shot in Atlanta. It feels very much very, very much where it's set. Without going into any details, because we're going to run this before the season finale, so we don't know how, our listeners don't know how it ends. But I was curious whether or not the response to this show, which has obviously been really overwhelmingly positive in a very specific kind of like, I needed this way, impacts the writing of season 2. Because I know you guys have been greenlit for a second season, and whether or not it's like, oh man, now this really means something to people. We kind of have to deliver on what they like, keep delivering on what people are looking for here.
I think, look, in a great way, Jason especially, but we were all very clear on, what our sports movie was. It's, and it wasn't a 1 year and then we'll do a different one the second year. It was a beginning, middle, and end. And the one thing it did was confirm our belief that, right or wrong, it's not a bad time to embrace hope and optimism and emotional, kind of undercurrents to shows in a way that people really care about each other. And so, you would be crazy to think that after having our fears allayed, that people don't want to watch that in a comedy, that we would get away from. So we're embracing it, and crossing our fingers that, people won't have had their full of it by then. But without a doubt, it just kind of reconfirmed for us what we wanted to do.
That's great, man. Well, I love the show. I know a lot of our listeners did too. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Chris, thank you for talking, man. I really appreciate it. And I would tell people, it's a dorky thing, so I don't usually do it, is social media, but the whether it's Jason liking your stuff or me and Brendan and the other cast member, we're actually on there because we think part of this whole show and the good spirit of it is communicating with people. So find us out there, and we're happy to gab about it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bill.